It was the night before one of the darkest battles in Israel's history. King Saul stood trembling in the darkness. The Philistine army had gathered against Israel, and Saul desperately needed an answer from God. But there was a terrifying problem. God was no longer answering him. No dream, no prophet, no divine message. And Saul knew that something terrible was coming. Then in desperation, he made a decision that would forever be remembered as one of the strangest moments in the Bible. He ordered his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium." But there was one problem. Saul himself had previously driven mediums and spiritists out of Israel. That night Saul disguised himself. He removed the clothing that revealed his identity and secretly traveled to a place called Endor. There he found a woman known for communicating with spirits. Saul approached her and made a terrifying request. "Please consult a spirit for me and bring up the person I name." But the woman was afraid. She reminded him that Saul had banned such practices from the land. She feared that this stranger might be setting a trap for her. But Saul promised that she would not be punished. So she finally agreed. Then Saul asked her to bring up Samuel, the prophet who had once guided him. And what happened next shocked everyone. The woman performed the ritual. Then suddenly she cried out in fear. She saw something she apparently did not expect. A figure appeared. And Saul asked, "What does he look like?" She described an old man wearing a robe. Saul immediately believed it was Samuel. He bowed down with his face toward the ground. Then the figure spoke. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul answered desperately. "I am in great distress. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me." Imagine that moment. The king of Israel had everything a king could possess: an army, a throne, power. Yet when the greatest crisis of his life arrived, he felt completely abandoned. Then came the message Saul feared most. Samuel reminded him, "The Lord has turned away from you and has become your enemy." Why? Because Saul had disobeyed God. The prophet reminded him of the command Saul had previously received concerning the Amalekites, and how Saul had failed to obey completely. Then Samuel delivered an even more terrifying prophecy. The Lord was giving Israel's kingdom to David, and now Saul's army was about to face the Philistines. Samuel said that Israel would be defeated, but then came the words that must have frozen Saul's heart. "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." Saul's future had been revealed. His sons would die, Israel would fall, and Saul himself would soon be dead. The king collapsed to the ground. He had been terrified before. Now he was completely broken. Saul had not eaten all day. After hearing the message, he had no strength left. The woman approached him and begged him to eat. At first, Saul refused, but eventually his servants joined the woman in convincing him. She prepared food. Saul ate. Then he and his servants rose and left into the darkness, but there was no escaping what was coming. The next day, Saul would enter the battlefield, and everything Samuel had predicted would begin to unfold. At Mount Gilboa, the armies of Israel faced the Philistines. The battle was brutal. Israel's army began to collapse. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons. Then tragedy struck. Saul's sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, were killed. The battle continued, and Saul himself was badly wounded by the archers. The king looked around and realized that defeat was unavoidable. His kingdom was collapsing. His sons were dead. And the prophecy from the night before was becoming reality. Saul had tried to find an answer outside of God, but now there was nowhere left to run. Saul finally died on Mount Gilboa. The first king of Israel had fallen. The man who once stood taller than many others had reached the end of his reign. His death was tragic, but the deeper tragedy had begun long before that final battle. Saul's greatest problem was not simply that he was afraid. It was that when God stopped answering him, Saul turned somewhere else. He sought guidance from a forbidden source instead of returning to God in repentance. And his desperate decision led him into an even darker moment. The story of Endor is therefore more than a mysterious encounter with Samuel. It is a warning about what desperation can make a person do. The story of the Witch of Endor remains one of the Bible's most mysterious passages. What exactly happened that night has been debated by Bible scholars for centuries. But one message is unmistakable. When Saul could not hear from God, he did not respond with repentance and trust. He searched for another source of guidance, and that decision led him deeper into darkness. Sometimes desperation makes us look for answers anywhere. But the story of Saul reminds us that not every voice offering an answer should be trusted. When fear takes over, don't let desperation decide your direction. Return to God, because the most dangerous moment isn't always when you have no answers. Sometimes it's when you're willing to accept the wrong one. If you want more mysterious and powerful stories from the Bible, subscribe to the channel and watch the next story.